Welcome to Philosophy of Value Workshops number 5 of Series 6. And the question this evening is the idea of the meaning in life still relevant to a modern philosophy of life? Reading The Pursuit of Value, Chapter 5, Sections 1, 2 and 6. The last 3 workshops have been about the character, origins and significance of consciousness. That is, how consciousness is significant in our lives, as well as a foundation for value and values. To this end, in the next 2 weeks, we will be discussing how religious and ethical values bear upon human life. Today, we are discussing how meaning and purpose express values that are central to human life, and that the expression of values in religion, ethics and meaning indicates their significance to consciousness. To both help define and explain the significance of value, we can outline its functions in these 3 contexts. 1. In religion, God is the highest value, providing both a value focus and a framework of meaning and purpose. 2. Ethical principles are values that guide moral action, thought by some to be a precondition of meaning. 3. And a meaningful life is also a valuable and worthwhile life. Yet before explicating this relation between life, meaning and value, we need to define what we are talking about. We must first distinguish epistemic meaning, as in what does this sentence mean, from the experiential meaning of meaning in life that we are talking about today. Also, meaning of life implies that there is some inherent meaning that we can discover, whereas meaning in life is something to be worked out the best we can. Another distinction is between meaning and purpose. I take it that meaning incurs some kind of felt experience that extends through time. Purpose, though, is directed towards some objective that may or may not result in meaning. I will be talking about both meaning and purpose as expressions of value. And finally, like other concepts, the concept of meaning is an anthropocentric construction subject to variation. It is subject to different historical, philosophical and other possible interpretations. Like other concepts such as truth, beauty, freedom, justice, rights, God and the moral good. Likewise, the question of the meaning of life has implications, many of which are unacceptable, like 1. There is one answer to the question which has universal application. 2. It assumes that the question is coherent and that it has priority over other questions. 3. And that the answer is externally located, expressed in the erroneous cliché that the truth is out there. But none of these assumptions are philosophically acceptable. So it's not a philosophically respectable question in the manner that it is presented. But because the question has been so enduring, we have to sort out what it could mean. We need to define the question in such a way that makes sense. We need to understand that the question of meaning and purpose is a metaphor for an undefined objective. So we first need to recognize the component that makes the meaningful life meaningful. We can discuss numerous options like cognition, knowledge, happiness, freedom and truth. But my objective is to show that the meaningful life is worthwhile due to the value component. Yet we can also define and describe the character of meaning by comparison and contrast to ethics. Both are value-based activities, and this comparison also raises the issue of truth in an analysis of meaning. Firstly, we can say that meaning in life is susceptible to facts in my life. That is, to find that my life's work is useless or that my wife doesn't love me can drain my life of meaning. We might argue that it need not be, but facts nevertheless usually affect meaning. But ethics has a way of evading facts by saying that my actions were moral because I had good intent. Utilitarians would disagree, but Kantians and others would agree on the significance of moral intent. Secondly, meaning is an embracing attitude that can be said to colour every aspect of my life. But ethics typically makes judgments about specific aspects of life deemed to be ethical. Virtue theorists would disagree, but even they would distinguish different virtues. We can begin our analysis of meaning by again considering what kind of things might sustain meaning. We can look at several common criteria noted above, like morality, freedom, choice, and other people. For Peter Singer, meaning is found in an ethical life. Moral action both engenders and is justified by meaning. A meaningful life requires ethical concern for others as a wider purpose in life than ourselves. But meaning isn't identical to or can be defined solely by ethical experience because, one, other activities apart from ethics, like the pursuit of excellence, also produce meaning. Two, meaning and ethics are different states or conditions, as above, in relation to facts and goodwill. For Robert Nozick, an absence of free will undercuts meaning in life. Freedom as a prerequisite of meaning has a basis in modern culture, existentialism, and ethics. And free will is a precondition of morality and moral value which can't be chosen without free choice. But the indispensability of freedom to finding meaning seems to be a cultural bias. And lack of freedom precludes meaning from people who don't have the required freedom. So freedom seems to be a contingent criterion which doesn't explain what meaning is. On a further criticism of an indiscriminate application of freedom, Hubert Dreyfus criticises how some existentialists freely assign meaning to things without restraint. He criticises Kantian, Nietzschean and Sartrean autonomy that seeks to impose itself upon the world. He singles out the author David Foster Wallace as imposing meaning upon life in acts of will and control. Dreyfus regards this as ultimately an unlivable, indiscriminate and obtuse response to life. Conversely, the meaning of events cannot be either simply accepted as given or chosen as acts of pure will. Events must be taken on board, yet reinterpreted and moulded to suit our own preferences. Three very significant factors which bear upon meaning then are truth or fact, other people, and death. We can discuss the significance of other people and death shortly. The question of truth and fact is often examined in cognitivist theories of meaning discussed by David Wiggins. Wiggins provides us with an academic account of cognitivist and non-cognitivist theories of meaning. Cognitivism explains activities like morals, motivation and meaning in terms of reason and perception. Following Hume, non-cognitivists explain such activities in terms of feeling and affect. Wiggins uses the myth of Sisyphus to explain these two theories. Sisyphus is condemned by the gods to roll a stone up a hill only for it to repeatedly roll down. On a cognitivist view, Sisyphus' work is meaningful only on a tangible outcome such as the building of a monument. On this view, meaning is either constituted by cognition or is obtained through cognition as a means. Wiggins also considers the cognitivist view, but finds it inadequate in its current form. On a non-cognitivist view, meaning is a psychological experience which doesn't depend on cognition. Wiggins adds that, on this view, it is values that are metaphorically injected into the veins of Sisyphus. Wiggins says a lot that we can't repeat here, but he raises two important points for our discussion. One, an association of, at least, a non-cognitivist theory of meaning with values. Two, the difficulty of incorporating truth and objectivity into a theory of meaning. Wiggins is critical of both cognitivist and non-cognitivist theories of meaning, but he argues that non-cognitivists cannot appeal to the objectivity that they need without contradiction. That is, their theory of meaning must appeal to objectivity in order to make it stick, which is a cognitivist claim. Another criticism Wiggins makes of a non-cognitivist theory of meaning is that it neglects outcome. A meaning is susceptible to facts such as the outcomes of our actions as well as objectivity. Wiggins is correct. Too little attention is usually paid to outcome as contributing to meaning. But in my view, there ought not to be such a great dependence on outcome, and I argue for a preference for an independence and a sufficiency of value as a hypothetical ideal. And conversely, cognitivism is too dependent on outcome and on supporting cognitive frameworks. There is also a tradition of a certain independence or indifference to outcome that we can take further. This thinking is found in Christianity, in Kant, in Hegel, and in G.K. Chesterton's view that, in order to succeed, a soldier or anyone, I quote, must seek his life in a spirit of furious indifference to it. I myself frame this attitude as a certain sufficiency of value that we'll discuss shortly. And although Wiggins criticises cognitivism as well as non-cognitivism, he doesn't mention the problem of death. And death, as the outcome that removes the future, is a huge problem for cognitivist theories of meaning. We will also look at the problem of death for theories of meaning in general. And I want to mitigate the wider problem of truth and objectivity by their replacement with normativity and coherence. And that normativity and coherence can be based on structures of consciousness and value. And although meaning as value is endorsed by Wiggins and as a valuable life, we need to say more about the correspondence between value and meaning in order to strengthen the idea of meaning as a mode of value. I previously defined particular kinds of value in terms of their objects. and the objects of value that produce meaning are more general than that of ethical value. That is, these objects are more pervasive in our lives and extend through longer periods of time. Yet what we do when we value objects isn't simply a recognition of their existence. Value involves an affirmation of and a preference for these objects over other objects. And the kind of value that meaning uses is further defined as not just an affirmation, but as a certain kind or quality of affirmation. And that value produces meaning is the affirmation of life that is an affirmation of consciousness. And the affirmation of life as consciousness can be more specifically described as the value of value. Moreover, there are reasons why the value of value promotes meaningful experience. The value of value has a proclivity towards substantive values like moral fortitude and magnanimity. And the value of value promotes a synthesis or individuation, as Jung called it, that constitutes meaning. That is, to consciously or unconsciously value what you really value is a vital element of meaning. Also, as noted above, understanding meaning in terms of value mitigates the problem of objectivity and truth. That is, objectivity and truth can be replaced by normativity and coherence based on consciousness and value. Such a constraint on values is unexpectedly found in Sartre's notion of being condemned to choose or condemned to be free. And choice constrains value and consciousness because choice is essential to value and consciousness. And I propose that requirements of consistency of value affords other more substantive constraints. That is, not to affirm value is contradictory, self-negating and self-defeating. Yet before explaining this contradiction, I should outline its implication of self-validation as I did 4 weeks ago. Self-validating a priori principles are the holy grail of systems of thought, but they do exist. Self-validating principles are used to justify logic and mathematics, but not thought possible in physics or ethics. Logic is determined by the self-evident and self-validating truths of Aristotle's 4 basic principles of logic. David Hilbert described mathematics as avoidance of contradiction and is therefore a self-validating a priori. A self-validating system within the human sphere is Descartes' I think, therefore I am. Physics isn't self-validating because it's an a posteriori system of contingent observations. Mathematics and logic are self-validating, but they can't establish principles for systems of physics or ethics. But I propose that the will to value is self-validating because the alternative is contradictory and self-negating. And systems of value need to be self-validating principles due to the problems such as posed by Hume. The contradiction of not valuing value as a self-validating principle can again be illustrated with Sartre's help. Sartre's notion of the spirit of seriousness takes the constraints of value further in several ways. The spirit of seriousness is to treat subjective values as objective, as either principles or objects. This is regarded as an inauthentic choice or act to avoid freedom and responsibility. The classic example is to say in bad faith that I have no choice. Firstly, inauthentic avoidance of freedom and responsibility in bad faith has consequences for life experience. We can say that inauthenticity degrades the agent's quality of experience and meaning in life. Secondly, affirmation of the idea that I have no choice mistakes that idea for an objective fact or an objective value. This is a failure of value or a failure to value, because to say I have no choice is a refusal to choose, which is a fundamental property of value. Thirdly, to take subjective values as objective is contradictory and erroneous. It is erroneous as well as contradictory because of the nature of consciousness and value. It is a failure of value because it is valuing a principle which has no value in itself. We can say something about the character of consciousness and value by looking at phenomenology. Like Heidegger, Sartre states that, I quote, "the being of the self as consciousness is value," and that, he goes on, reflective consciousness cannot arise without at the same time disclosing values. Sartre built on the idea of contrast, choice and selection as constituents of both value and consciousness. He holds that choice is not just preference, but a selection traced back to its ontological foundation. And that, I quote, "every choice supposes elimination and selection," unquote, thereby producing value. Sartre wants to trace selection to its ontological foundation, but he doesn't do this explicitly. But we can explain and extend with the notions of choice and selection with the concept of contrast. Monotone is inimical to selection, choice, value, perception, and indeed to consciousness. These capacities need contrast like a black spot on a white board. We can say then that every perception entails contrast, selection and value. We look one way and make a selection and preference that produces both negation and affirmation. Selection entails preference and value. Elimination implies contrast as a precondition of value. These may be just nascent values, yet that is to be expected when explaining the origins of value. The point is that value and consciousness are coexistent, and that to value is to value consciousness as the essentialer of human existence. I noted earlier that I'm also talking about purpose towards some objective as well as the experience of meaning. Purpose is both needed by and produced by a reflective human consciousness that is required to choose. The intimate relation between meaning, value and consciousness provides that purpose. This is because value and consciousness can become a future objective, or more specifically, a particular mode of value that is a sufficiency of value. But death appears to negate both the experience of meaning and purpose as the pursuit of a future objective. There are numerous practical responses to death, like familiarity, resignation, and immortality. But I want to look at three philosophical views of death before presenting my own. Firstly, on Lucretius' Stoic view, death is nothing. We aren't disturbed by our absence before birth, so why are we disturbed after death by our absence? But my future is different from my past. I invest in projects that I don't want to end. We have hopes for the future, we grieve for others, and they grieve for us. So in my view, the Stoic view of death isn't realistic and cannot offer a realistic solution. Viktor Frankl, author of From Death Camp to Existentialism, holds that death itself is what makes life meaningful, unquote. This is because death limits time, which gives it value and meaning. Unending time would be valueless. Robert Nozick criticises this as only one kind of structural limitation, finiteness in time, and of itself, limitation doesn't produce value, it only amplifies it. Yet similarly, Heidegger sees death as a full stop, a completion, a culmination that can give meaning to life. Death is, I quote, a possibility of being which Dasein itself has to take over, unquote, as an authentic choice. Death must be accepted in anxiety as an authentic choice. But Sartre's critique of Heidegger is that death is a contingent event, so it can't be essential to meaning. A criticism of Sartre is that a wider meaning of death as loss can give it philosophical significance. And a wider significance of death can be found as a metaphor for loss and human finitude. The above are some limitations of Lucretius, Frankl's, Heidegger's and Sartre's responses to death. So it's not clear in their accounts how the value of life and authenticity resolves the problem of death. Yet I agree with Sartre that there is a problem of reifying death or giving it an absolute status in a theory of meaning. Death is not the definitive problem of life, but as a form of total loss, it can encapsulate other problems. For example, as a total loss, a solution to death can also point to solutions for other forms of loss. The problem of death therefore needs to be seen in this wider context, and as such, death is one problem of life that must be balanced with other problems. And of course, I hold that the answer to death is the same as the answer to life, that is, a sufficiency of value that we will get to later. Yet I just want to mention another meaning of the idea of absence as an aspect of death, consciousness and value. It helps to note that the parameters of both human existence and meaning are consciousness and death. And it is within this context that life must be lived and resolved, I think, in terms of value. We have just mentioned how Frankl and Heidegger regard death as essential to an account of meaning. Yet others, like Hegel and Sartre, regard non-being and nothingness as essential aspects of existence. And like them, I see non-being and nothingness as representations of aspects of consciousness. Yet, In another sense, non-being, nothingness and absence are aspects of consciousness and the value that is a resolution. That is, the proposed sufficiency of value is also an absence of baggage of supporting conceptions of the self. So it's also in this way that death can take on a wider significance in an account of meaning. I can't develop this view here, but I can continue with the idea of an absent future. That is, another significant aspect of death is that it can be construed as the removal of one's future. Again, in another sense, this problem is also one of not being able to complete one's life's projects. Human failure prevents the completion of projects. Death prevents completion of the project of life. In both human finitude and death as the removal of the future, a particular theory of meaning is required. And as an encompassing theory of human existence, consciousness, cognition, meaning and value is needed. Using the cognitivist and non-cognitivist classification, non-cognitivist theories find meaning in the present experience. But cognitivist theories find meaning in conceptions like conceptions of the future. So we can immediately see why death is a problem for cognitivist theories of meaning. The problem is that cognitivist accounts seek favourable outcomes in a future that is negated by death. This problem of cognitivism suggests that we should look at two things. One, the problem of death should consider the significance of the future. Two, cognitivist limitations suggest that we should consider non-cognitivist theories. So what we can do now is restate the problem of death in order to find an appropriate solution. We can say that death is a loss of the future and a fear of not having a future. The question then becomes, what can we find in the present that can confront an absent future? This is a huge requirement, but we can find clues in previous theories. Heidegger presents several notions of authentic choice, attitudes and states of mind in relation to death. For example, he says, being towards death is grounded in care. And care is a particular kind of value state. It is an independence of value in the face of death that he describes as unsupported by concernful solicitude. Heidegger's disdain of concernful solicitude is reinforced by his scorn for the endorsement by the they, which is his term for other people. And his view of death in unsupported solicitude endorses a certain independence of value. And this independence of value corresponds to a value sufficiency that I propose as a response to death. Heidegger need not be taken as an oracle of truth on this matter, yet his considerations can help to bring relevant concepts into focus. In this spirit, I want to present a Star Trek story that takes such attitudes to death further. The android Data constructs a female android companion that Starfleet orders him to dismantle. His companion's attitude isn't sorrow, but happiness at having the opportunity of self-consciousness. This attitude again expresses several things that we can learn from. It expresses the wisdom of the absence of desire for a future existence that cannot be granted. It celebrates the present and is an absence of regret that is sufficient to the present. And these considerations leave us with a number of outcomes. I want to consider 3 of these as features of an answer to the problem of death for meaning. 1. The element of time. 2. The mental states of care or value. 3. The notion of absence. On the first element of time, death is a loss of the future which forces us to analyse the present. Cognitivists like John McDowell and Thomas Nagel hold that the present and the future have the same status. But non-cognitivists like Nietzsche and Sartre insist on the justification of values in the present. But value states can only exist in the present. In the future, they are only conceptions of states. And these considerations point to a solution in the present. And 2, Heidegger's notion of care as value and meaning introduces the idea of a value state that can confront death. But what kind of value or value state in the present can deal with the loss of the future? My answer is already known to be a certain sufficiency of value or value sufficiency. I've previously given examples of value sufficiency, such as self-esteem, being in love, moral fortitude, heroism, magnanimity, and meaning. The idea is that sufficient value in the present is able to withstand the loss of the future in death. This isn't an esoteric idea. As noted previously, parents, soldiers, and firefighters give their lives for others. A similar idea is found in the Gospels in the idea that perfect love casts out fear. 3. And the third feature of absence can be regarded as a property of sufficient value. Paradoxically, sufficient value is also an insufficiency and is defined by quality rather than quantity. Sufficiency can't be just a quantity or a maximization of what we want, but must entail quality. And as earlier, quality of value can be defined by absence as found in immorality, altruism, and modesty. These considerations lead me to an affirmation of value as both an account of meaning and as a response to death. That is, an affirmation of value as the value of value, the will to value, and the pursuit of value. And that because of its preferences, the will to value tends to produce a sufficiency of value. To explain the principle of the will to value, we can compare, or rather contrast it, to Nietzsche's will to power. We should first note that Nietzsche's will to power is over-inclusive, naturalistic, and possibly Teutonic. Heidegger also rejects Nietzsche's will to power as overbearing, and he interprets it as the will to will. Yet Nietzsche also endorses a will to will in the idea of a free spirit that wills its own will. This indicates a compatibility of the will to power with the will to will, which can be interpreted as the will to value. This is because value is the motivating purpose of the will, which relates the will to value to the will to will. Commentators Clark and Dudrick find what they also call the will to value in Nietzsche's Beyond Good and Evil. Moreover, Nietzsche is quintessentially a philosopher of value, enhancing the will to will as the will to value. And the will to value leads to a sufficiency of value as an explanation of meaning and an answer to death. But the question remains of how to resolve the issues of both the welfare and the death of other people. Other people are the higher centres of value and meaning that we can find in our world. And for that reason, a value-seeking agent must give special attention to other people. This question will be attended to in 2 weeks in a discussion of value theory ethics. Yet the significance of other people magnifies the death of others, both as a tragic loss and as a philosophical problem. For this reason, the death of others needs to be integrated into a general account of death as loss. But the problem is that their death is not only our loss to bear, but also their loss. Yet there are different ways in which the loss of others can be mitigated, at least for ourselves. We could consider the value of the time spent with a deceased person as surviving their absence. Yet having an answer to the problem of death might also alleviate the difficulty of losing them. And other people's loss of life is a real loss to them, but not one that they know about. It's in this facile but real sense that no one experiences death, which is a form of absence. Yet our own maturity and value sufficiency might also mitigate the tragedy of their absence. In conclusion, my objective here has been to show how meaning is one of the key expressions of value, and that meaning, which includes death, can both be defined and resolved in terms of value. I hope to have done this through the principles of the will to value and its outcome in a sufficiency of value. That is, the will to value and the sufficiency of value are consistent with the experience of meaning, and that purpose in life can be secured by pursuing these objectives. One of the greatest challenges, however, for the experience of meaning and purpose in life is the prospect of death. Yet a sufficiency of value in the present is proposed as a means to confront death as the removal of the future. In this respect, the answer proposed for living a meaningful life is the same as that to confront death. Next week, we will be discussing religion as both an expression of value and as a supportive cognitive framework. So let me have your criticisms or comments on websites like meetup.com, philosophy of value workshops.